Hello again. In the description to this video, I give a link to a piece on Amnesty International's website, which is headed "The Great Social Media Crackdown." There is mention of, and I quote, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube being blocked after a peaceful protest broke into deadly riots. Gosh, that sounds really up to date, doesn't it? We are told that this kind of thing is on the cards if those social media companies don't get their act together and ban incitements to violence in this country. Quite right too, as many people in Britain are now agreeing. The only thing is, that piece by Amnesty is from 2014, and the author is writing disapprovingly of China, Vietnam and North Korea. How things have changed in a relatively short time. What was then being denounced 10 years ago as censorship and prevention of freedom of expression in the context of China is now being accepted as quite the way to go about things in Britain. It may have been outrageous for China to crack down on social media in the wake of riots then, but for Britain to do so now is very sensible, and only crazy far-right nutjobs would object to such a move. Take 53-year-old Judy Sweeney, who lived in a village near Kidsgrove in Staffordshire. I give a link to a news item about her in the description to this video. She was annoyed to see people rebuilding the wall around a mosque that had been the focus of a riot and said that it's absolutely ridiculous. Don't protect the mosques. Blow the mosques up with the adults inside. She posted this very injudicious remark on a community group on Facebook and has now been sent to prison for 15 months. Of course, saying such a thing on the internet was unwise, and I cannot condone the sentiments, but it wasn't really a threat of death, was it? Which is what she's being convicted of. You have to look at the context here. If I was part of an angry mob which was rampaging through the streets and smashing things up, starting fires and so on, and I shouted to these people, "Let's burn down the mosque," then that would be a wicked attempt to incite arson and perhaps murder, and I would certainly deserve to be arrested. Saying the same thing on the local community group on Facebook is another matter entirely, and it's not really an attempt to incite anybody to do anything. As it happens, I've said something similar in the course of a light-hearted private conversation myself. Not relating to mosques, but rather to a certain branch of Christianity. I'm a great believer in making connections with the Lord in nature and among people, rather than being in church on a Sunday morning singing hymns. And sometimes I find that people that do that don't tend to have as much connection with the Lord as people who seek the deity in nature do. I remember on one occasion talking about this, and I said casually that I'd like to see some chapels dynamited and the congregation forced out into the open air for a walk in the countryside, rather than being shut up inside singing hymns and saying prayers. I need hardly say that I was not seriously advocating this as a course of action, but imagine if I had tweeted it or said it in an exchange on Facebook. These days my feet would not have touched the ground. Just to make it very clear, I disapprove of rioting and smashing things up, and I think that those who engage in such actions deserve to be arrested. Urging people to commit offences during a protest march or a time of public disorder is criminally irresponsible, and those whipping up crowds to violence in public have always been liable to arrest and imprisonment. This is very different from simply saying things on social media, things which nobody will take any notice of, and most people will rightly view as being idiotic exaggerations. The woman whom I mentioned was sent to prison for 15 months after being prosecuted under the 2023 Online Safety Act. Remember the law that was vitally necessary to protect the kiddies and stop online bullies driving teenagers to suicide, and would prevent people on social media encouraging anorexia and so on? When it was passed, everybody had the idea that this was a wonderful act which was aimed at protecting young and vulnerable people online. I bet nobody guessed that less than a year after it became law, it would be used to prosecute and imprison a 53-year-old woman for an idiotic, unguarded comment on Facebook. Read through the article from Amnesty, to which I give a link, and then ask yourself how it can be that just 10 years after left-wing people were wringing their hands over the social media crackdown in China, they are urging the very same thing in Britain. I honestly think there is no sort of political memory at all these days, and the past is simply obliterated after a few months, wiped clean, so that nobody remembers what we were supposed to think a year ago. It really is 1984 to the life.